Hey guys, so in this video we are going to talk about priorities, so let's get into it. Now, priorities, what do I mean by priorities? Well, this one is going to be about company priorities and a delivery strategy that you may face out there in the wild, and it's fairly common, at least from my perspective. A lot of companies have this sort of structure to their IT projects. So I don't actually know if there is an official name, but it's, as I've been introduced to it twice now, it's called the P1, P2, P3 type of situation or type of method, basically. So the idea is virtually that your stakeholders, usually these are, for the unions out there, a stakeholder is a person who has a vested interest in the success of the project that you are working on. This can be anything from investors to your boss, to your product manager, to customers. It can be all kinds of types of people. It's just a generic term to define people who are interested in the success of the software that you are writing. So, with that said and done, the P1, P2 system is basically the idea that your stakeholders will create a so-called backlog. And the backlog is just a very, very big list of different things that your company should deliver in some amount of time, right? And what happens then is that once everybody has decided on what should be done and so forth, ideally, it kind of depends on the company. In my experience, the best thing you can do is to have what I call a grooming session or a prioritization. It depends on what term you want to use. And this is a meeting where the developers basically sit down with whoever's in charge of the backlog, because ideally you should always have somebody who's in charge of these tasks. It should not be the developers. It kind of defies the whole purpose of having the priority system. And I'll explain in just a moment what it actually exactly means. But basically what happens after you sit down in this meeting, where you go through the stories that the business have decided on should be delivered within a given time frame. In other words, you usually chunk things up in quarters, so Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 for the different quarters over the year. And the idea here is that the business gets to decide what is the most important stuff. That's the priority system for them. They decide these are the things that we are most interested in, and if the developers start working, we want them to work on this first, and then that, and then that, and then that, etc., etc. And then they kind of guesstimate how much work it's feasible for you as a software developer to deliver for the first quarter. And they chunk that up into these stories or workloads, if you will. You sit down in this grooming meeting, and now you and your team gets to decide what's a priority 1 and what's a priority 2. So what that basically means is that you are simply expressing that, all right, we are delivering everything that is priority 1. And we will do our best to deliver everything that is priority 2. And this may be a small and silly thing, but it actually is a very useful mental tool that you should have with you, because what happens when you all decide as an organization what is priority 1 and what is priority 2, that means that there's no ambiguity. You don't have the issue of hippos coming in. Hippo is a highest paid person opinion term, where you have different stakeholders, because trust me, I've been there. There are, if you don't, as an organization, decide what is most important for the developers to work on, you will have different stakeholders who just come in and try to shim in requests, and you just mess up the whole development process for the developers. And sometimes you put your developers in a very it's a tough spot, because you are working on one thing that your PO wants, and then your CEO comes in and says, hey, I want a different thing. And all of a sudden, now you as the developer, you shouldn't be in that situation. It's not your job or your responsibility to decide who gets what. That's something the CEO and the PO, they should have a talk and decide that for themselves, not come to you and try to squeeze in a feature request here and there. That's not your job. So that's why these meetings are very good, because when you have a backlog and then you set the priorities, it's a two-section thing, right? So business stakeholder. They've already decided what they want to be done, and now it's your turn to decide in which order everything happens and what you think is feasible to deliver within the given time frame. So what then happens is that you usually categorize these priorities in a so-called sprint. And a sprint is just a time period. It can be any arbitrary time period. It can be 2 weeks, it can be a month, it can be 2 months, whatever. And then you'd say, all right, we think that these are the stories that we feel are feasible to deliver in this given time period. And then you set some of them to priority 1 and some of them to priority 2. Because when you time estimate, you will kind of just have you basically get a short introduction, or ideally don't make it short. Make sure that you really know what it is that you are estimating, because time estimation, guys, it is really tricky to estimate accurately. And I will even go one further, and I will say this because I've been here 100 times. Say no. If you are forced into time estimating something that you are uncertain of, if you don't have enough information, or if you feel that you don't understand, or if you feel that you cannot accurately estimate this, say so. Because they will hold you to this deadline. They will, and they will be super pissed. Well, it depends on the company, but in my experience, companies do not like deadlines to be broken. That means that, and this is kind of unfair to you, if your business people have done a really shitty job at prepping and making sure that everything is crystal clear for you, and you're supposed to time estimate, then you take the luxury of saying, sorry, you haven't prepared this enough. We need to take another story because I can't accurately estimate this. Put it in their corner, because you will instinctively try to estimate something, and if you don't know enough to do it accurately, you're just going to mess everything up. This is something that I have a problem with. It's actually a personal issue that I have with a lot of business people who they don't understand what type of position they put the developers in when they don't do a good job. If they come in there and they're not on board on, okay, this is what's supposed to be happening, it's supposed to work this way and that way. If they don't know themselves what they're asking for, it gets really tricky for us developers to estimate how much time we need to fix something, because we don't know. And then it becomes our fault when the deadline is missed. So that's a very vicious circle that will happen, because it comes back to the PO. That's what they don't see. So when we miss the deadline and we have to cut corners and decrease the quality of the work, it's just work that needs to come back, and then now we need to go into the next meeting, and it flows over to the next sprint, and so forth and so forth. So it cascades outwards. So make sure that you always know what you're estimating. So once that's been done, you know as I said, how much time each task has. You basically just try to estimate how much you think is feasible. You set something to priority 1 and some stuff to priority 2, and then you start working. And then the general rule of thumb is that the priority 1, the P ones, those are the things that you prioritize over everything else. Those are the things that you start working on first, and unless you have something that is truly business critical, something like a serious system failure or something like that, that's your focus. As I said, these are small mental tools that you can keep and use in your company. They are not a silver bullet or anything like that, but I found them to be extremely useful, and the most important thing that they bring to the table is that the whole company gets a sense of priority, and that's the important thing. Because if everything is just another story, nobody really cares about delivery, and they don't really care. I mean, this is a way to create a sensation of purpose, and as I said, priority. And that's very useful when you want to create some incentive for basically everybody in the company. So I hope this was useful to you. Have a great day.